Have you ever found yourself holding on to someone, not because they lift you, but because you're too afraid of what letting go might say about you? You wouldn't be the first. We've all been there, wrapped in relationships that once brought joy, now heavy with obligation. They used to feel like home, now they feel like cages. And we stay, because it's family, because it's history, because they were there when no one else was, because walking away feels like abandoning some sacred rule we never agreed to, but somehow still live by. But what if the real betrayal is staying? We live in a world that romanticizes endurance. We're told to be loyal no matter the cost, that true friends never leave, that blood is thicker than water, that real love forgives everything. But the truth? Sometimes the people closest to you, those you laugh with, cry with, even share your blood with, can become the very people that keep you from becoming who you're meant to be. And that realization is terrifying, because what do you do when the ones you're supposed to love are the very ones hurting you the most? Stoic philosophy doesn't offer you comforting cliches or false hope. It doesn't hand you permission slips to avoid hard decisions. What it gives you instead is clarity, discipline, and the unshakable belief that your life, your peace, and your integrity must come before anyone else's expectations. The ancient Stoics, from Epictetus to Marcus Aurelius, taught that life is not about pleasing others. It's about living with virtue. And virtue demands we confront uncomfortable truths. They believe that we must focus only on what is within our control. And if a relationship, be it friend, partner, or family, forces you to abandon your reason, your values, or your peace, then no matter who it is, it might be time to let go. This isn't about cutting people off coldly. It's not about seeking revenge or acting out of spite. It's about learning to see relationships for what they are, not for what they used to be or what you wish they would become. Because here's what no one tells you. Not every relationship is meant to last a lifetime. Some were only meant to teach you something. Some were only meant for a season, and some you've simply outgrown. There's no shame in that. In fact, the Stoics would say that recognizing misalignment is not weakness, it's wisdom. And yet we hesitate, we second-guess, we internalize guilt. But they're family. But they were there for me when... But they don't mean to hurt me. We cling to memories. We justify red flags. We wear our pain like armor and call it loyalty. But loyalty without truth is a prison. And the cost? Yourself. When you stay in a relationship that depletes you, you begin to lose things. First slowly, then all at once. Your laughter becomes less frequent. Your voice softens, not from peace, but from fear. Your dreams begin to feel too big. Your goals too selfish. Your identity begins to erode, till one day you no longer recognize the person you've become. You silence yourself, you shrink, you stay, but you don't have to. You don't have to explain your healing. You don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need a dramatic reason to walk away. Sometimes people don't need to hurt you more for you to realize they've already hurt you enough. The question isn't, are they good people? The question is, are they good for me? Do they nurture your growth or resent it? Do they respect your boundaries or routinely step over them? Do they listen to understand or only to defend themselves? Do you leave their presence feeling whole or hollow? The Stoics believed in examining everything under the light of reason. They didn't tell us to run from pain, but to face it, to use it, to learn from it. And right now, that pain you're feeling around a certain relationship, it might be your greatest teacher. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Your discomfort is not a dead end, it's a direction. But here's the thing. When we start to question our relationships, especially the long-standing or familial ones, people will resist. They'll guilt you. They'll remind you of your past. They'll tell you that you're being selfish, dramatic, ungrateful. Don't let the noise distract you from the truth. You are not selfish for honoring your values. You are not dramatic for identifying mistreatment. You are not ungrateful for wanting peace. In fact, the most profound gratitude you can express for life, for your potential, for those who do love you well, is to stop betraying yourself. The Stoics weren't afraid of solitude. They embraced it, because they knew solitude with integrity is always better than company that corrupts. And if that makes you feel lonely right now, let me promise you something. There are people waiting to meet the healed version of you, but you can't meet them if you're still buried under the weight of who you're not allowed to become. So yes, this is a hard conversation, but it's a necessary one. And if you've made it this far, it means you're brave enough to have it. In this journey, We're going to walk through 10 powerful signs that a relationship, yes, even one with a parent, sibling, or lifelong friend, may no longer belong in your life. Each sign isn't here to create blame, but to bring clarity. We'll explore the emotional patterns, the philosophical roots, and the internal signals we too often ignore. And through it all, we'll anchor ourselves in Stoic wisdom, reminding ourselves again and again that peace is not passive. Peace is a choice. So take a deep breath, set your defenses down, and allow yourself to hear the truth, not from me, but from within, because something inside you already knows what needs to be done. Let's walk through this together. Sign 1. The relationship stifles your growth. Some relationships don't die with violence or betrayal. They die in silence, slow, invisible erosion of your spirit, your energy, your momentum. You look back and can't remember the last time you shared a dream without feeling like you had to explain it. You think about the moments you felt most alive and realize none of them involved the people you spend most of your time with. You catch yourself hesitating before speaking up, before expressing excitement, before making a change, and all because of them. It's not hatred that holds you back. It's subtle disapproval, dismissive comments, a cold shoulder, a glance that says, "You're not who you used to be." And maybe you're not. Maybe you've grown, and they haven't. But instead of cheering for your evolution, they make you feel guilty for it, uncomfortable, selfish, like your progress is a betrayal. Let's be clear. That is not love. That's control wrapped in nostalgia. That's fear disguised as concern. That's insecurity hiding behind familiarity. The Stoics would tell you this: nature is change, is resistance to nature. You are not here to stay the same for anyone. Marcus Aurelius didn't rule Rome by maintaining the status quo of his inner circle. He ruled with clarity, anchored in the belief that change is not an obstacle, it's the essence of life. In his meditations, he constantly reminded himself that growth must never be stifled by fear, nor by loyalty to those who refuse to move forward. He wrote, "What is not good for the swarm is not good for the bee." If your relationships do not allow you to flourish, they are not serving the whole, they are stunting it. You might be asking, but what if they just don't understand me? Here's the truth. They might not. Not everyone will. And that's okay. But understanding is not the same as support. Someone doesn't have to get your path in order to respect your right to walk it. The moment someone begins to discourage your becoming just because it threatens their comfort, they are no longer walking with you. They are walking against you. And whether they say it kindly or not, the result is the same. You begin to dim your light to make them feel safe in their shadows. You stop trying. You stop growing. You stop being you. Ask yourself honestly, when you talk about what excites you, do they lean in or pull away? When you evolve, do they celebrate or criticize? When you rise, do they feel proud or left behind? These aren't judgmental questions, they're revealing ones. Seneca once said, "He who is a friend loves you as you are and wishes you to become better." That's the key. A true connection not only holds space for who you are, it welcomes who you are becoming. If someone is only supportive when you're small, they're not really supportive. They're just comfortable. And here's what's dangerous about that. We internalize it. We begin to believe our growth is a problem. We stop pursuing the things that once set our souls on fire because we're afraid of outgrowing the people we love. But growth is not abandonment, and staying small is not loyalty. It's self-betrayal. Let me share a story. There was a woman named Erin. She was creative, ambitious, and deeply intuitive. For years, she remained in a friendship that felt safe, nostalgic, familiar. Her best friend had been with her through college, heartbreaks, job losses. They shared everything. But as Erin began to change, meditate, write, explore deeper parts of herself, her friend's energy shifted. "You're not fun anymore," she'd say. "You used to be spontaneous. You used to be you." But Erin was her. Just more of her. A deeper version. A more thoughtful version. Still, the comments kept coming. And slowly, Erin began to shrink. She stopped talking about the book she was writing. She stopped bringing up spiritual practices. She stayed silent during moments that once would have sparked joy. Until one day, sitting across the table, Erin realized she had become a ghost of herself, all to preserve a friendship built on a version of her that no longer existed. She made the hardest decision of her life. She walked away, not with anger, with gratitude, because that friend had served a sacred role in her journey. But the journey had shifted, and Erin had the courage to shift with it. This is what growth demands, not just the pursuit of more, but the release of what no longer aligns. And sometimes what no longer aligns wears a familiar face. The Stoics didn't teach blind detachment, they taught clarity. They taught that the people around you shape your thoughts, your beliefs, your soul. If your surroundings suffocate your potential, you don't endure. You adapt, you shift, you choose. You choose to stay true to your nature, even if it means being misunderstood. You choose to follow the voice that whispers, "There's more for you," even if it means leaving behind the ones who can't see it. Because here's the truth you already know but are scared to say out loud. The people who truly love you will never ask you to become less. They will never punish your evolution. They will never shame your healing. They will never make your growth feel like betrayal. They will grow with you, or cheer for you, or respectfully step aside. And those who don't, they're not villains, they're simply not meant for this next chapter. So what do you do when you realize a relationship is stifling your growth? You pause, you reflect, you grieve, because grief will come, even for relationships that needed to end. And then you rise with love, with clarity, with the quiet strength the Stoics called virtue, living not by impulse but by principle. You forgive them, not for their sake, but for yours, so you can move forward unburdened. And then you walk toward the version of yourself that you've been postponing, because you owe yourself more than mere survival in someone else's comfort zone. You owe yourself growth, unapologetic, unstoppable, sacred growth. So let this be the moment you choose it. Let this be the moment you say yes to your expansion, and let the people who cannot celebrate that fade gently into your past, with grace, with peace, and without regret. Sign 2. You are controlled, not respected. Control doesn't always arrive with shouting or ultimatums. Sometimes it arrives softly, with concern, with tradition, with years of knowing you so well. It wears the costume of care, but when you take a closer look, it's simply fear disguised as guidance. You know it when it happens. At first you think, they're just looking out for me. But over time you start to feel smaller in their presence. Your decisions start sounding like negotiations. Your boundaries begin to feel like disobedience. And suddenly you're asking for permission to live your own life. That's not love, that's control. And there's a world of difference between someone walking with you and someone leading you by the leash of their expectations. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom in Stoicism is not about your environment, it's about your inner authority. If someone consistently overrides that inner compass, even gently, you're no longer living by your will. You're surviving under theirs. Control isn't always overt. Sometimes it looks like silence when you make a choice they disagree with. Other times it sounds like, "I'm just concerned," followed by a list of reasons why your decision is wrong, misguided, or selfish. It's when your growth feels like a threat to them, when your independence becomes a trigger. That is not respect. Respect allows space. Respect accepts evolution. Respect knows that love isn't ownership, but control wants compliance. You'll notice it when you try something new, and they make a subtle remark. You'll notice it when your no doesn't land as a boundary, but as a betrayal. You'll notice it when you begin to hide parts of yourself, not because they're wrong, but because you're tired of being questioned, corrected, or dismissed. Over time, you become a version of yourself that keeps the peace at all costs. And the cost? Your freedom. Stoicism asks us to live by reason, by our own reason. Not someone else's comfort, not society's expectations, and certainly not the emotional whims of someone who's afraid of losing control. You are not here to be a character in someone else's story. You are here to write your own. But when you're in a controlling relationship, you start to forget that. You begin to feel as though your worth is tied to how well you conform. You question your instincts. You defer to them, even when your body is screaming that something's off. And here's the tragic part. They may not even realize they're doing it. Some forms of control are learned behaviors, passed down, normalized, sugar-coated. It doesn't make it less toxic. It just makes it harder to recognize. You might hear phrases like, "You've changed. I just want what's best for you." You don't listen anymore. But if what's best for you always aligns with their view of who you should be, you're not being loved. You're being shaped. And if the only version of you they accept is the one who agrees, obeys, or follows, then their acceptance isn't love. it's control. So what does respect look like? Respect sounds like, I may not fully understand, but I support your right to choose. Respect feels like freedom, like trust, like safety. It's knowing that your decisions won't be weaponized against you. It's knowing that disagreement won't result in emotional punishment. It's being able to grow in your own direction without fearing abandonment or criticism. Ask yourself, do I feel safe expressing my real thoughts around them? Have I started hiding parts of myself to keep them calm? Do I regularly seek their approval before making decisions that affect only me? Have I mistaken their fear for love? Seneca once said, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." How many moments of growth have you postponed because you feared their reaction? How many choices have you softened, edited, or abandoned because their opinion outweighed your own clarity? That's not a relationship. That's a cage. Let me tell you a brief story. Maya was a bright, capable woman in her early 30s. Her mother loved her deeply, but always expected Maya to live by the same rules she had. When Maya decided to switch careers, her mother panicked. Why would you throw away everything you've built? What if you fail? What will people think? It wasn't just the words. It was the disappointment in her eyes, the silence, the withdrawal of warmth. Maya stayed in her old job 3 more years, not because she wanted to, but because the cost of her mother's disapproval felt too high. When she finally left, she realized something chilling. She'd become a stranger to herself just to remain a daughter who pleased her mother. That's the power control has, not to scream, but to shape. But Stoicism teaches us, you are not here to live someone else's idea of your life. Your will, your capacity to choose your thoughts, your path, your values, is sacred. And any relationship that attempts to suppress that, even out of love, must be questioned. This doesn't mean you need to sever ties completely, but it does mean you need to redefine them. You need to re-establish your independence. You need to learn how to speak truth without fear of being punished for it. And you need to see clearly. Someone who respects you will make space for your decisions, even if they wouldn't make the same ones. They won't try to steer you like a ship they own. They'll stand beside you, offering support but never taking the wheel, because they know you're not theirs to control. You never were. And if someone can't love you without managing you, that's not a relationship worth preserving. That's a role you've been assigned, and it's time to leave the stage. You were not born to play the part of the obedient child, the agreeable friend, the compliant partner. You were born to live, to evolve, to think freely, and to grow into the fullness of who you are, without explanation, without guilt. Remember, boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about keeping yourself intact. If someone crosses them repeatedly and calls it love, they're not confused, they're controlling you. And your silence is the permission. So speak, choose, walk if you must. Because respect isn't what people say when they're calm. It's how they treat you when you disagree, when you change, when you rise. Let them rise with you or let them go. But never again mistake control for care. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not for how well you behave. Sign 3, constant emotional chaos. Chaos doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Subtle, constant, exhausting. It shows up in the tension you carry in your chest before a phone call, in the second guessing of your tone before you speak, in the practiced way you tread through a conversation, avoiding any misstep that might spark the next unpredictable reaction. Emotional chaos is one of the most overlooked signs that a relationship is unhealthy, especially when it comes from someone we love. It rarely looks like rage. It looks like inconsistency, like warm one day, cold the next, like an apology followed by the same hurtful pattern. It's not the fight that drains you. It's the walking on eggshells before it. And over time you adapt. You stop expressing yourself honestly, not because you don't have thoughts, but because you've learned that peace is fragile. You've internalized the idea that any wrong move will destroy it. That is not love, that is survival. The Stoics warned us against giving others the power to disturb our inner tranquility. They believed that true peace, ataraxia, can only exist when we are not ruled by the emotions of others. And yet, many people live in relationships where their nervous system is always alert. They don't feel safe to relax, to be still, to simply exist without anticipating the next emotional shift. Ask yourself, do I feel like I need to manage their emotions constantly? Am I often anxious before seeing or talking to them? Do I feel relief when I'm away from them? Have I started keeping parts of myself hidden just to avoid triggering their reactions? If your answer is yes, you're not overreacting. You're responding to instability. And here's the deeper truth: instability is not a phase. In unhealthy relationships, it is the structure. You've been taught that chaos is a sign of passion, that love is supposed to hurt sometimes, that roller coasters are just part of the ride. But the Stoics would disagree. They believed that relationships should elevate your reason, not agitate your mind. That a good relationship is a partnership in virtue, not an endless crisis. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." But what happens when your reality is constant suffering? When the emotional waves are so relentless that even in calm, you're bracing for the next hit? In that environment, you can't think clearly. You lose your sense of self. Your clarity becomes fogged by fear, and fear doesn't nurture love. It poisons it. The result? You become hyper-vigilant. Every conversation is a test. Every mood change is a threat. Every quiet moment is filled with the question, did I do something wrong? This is not sustainable. This is not peace. And peace is not a luxury. It's your foundation. Let's be honest, chaos is addictive. It gives you highs and lows. It keeps you occupied. It makes your nervous system mistake drama for connection. But real connection, it's calm, steady, safe. It doesn't spike your cortisol. It doesn't punish you with silence. It doesn't leave you wondering where you stand. In real connection, love doesn't have to be proven through pain. It's shown through presence, through consistency, through the absence of fear. Let me share a brief story. Eleanor had been in a relationship for 6 years. Her partner was charismatic, loving, and spontaneous, but he was also emotionally unpredictable. Arguments would erupt out of nowhere. Silent treatments could last for days. Promises were broken without warning. When things were good, they were incredible, intimate, joyful, hopeful. But when things were bad, they were silent, distant, sharp. Eleanor kept chasing the highs, hoping the good moments would return for good. They never did. She began doubting her own memory, wondering if she was just too sensitive, if maybe she was the one sabotaging things. It wasn't until a close friend asked, "Do you feel safe with him?" that she paused. Not loved, not desired, not entertained, safe? And the answer was no. That's when she knew, that's when she left. Not because he was always terrible, but because her peace was never certain. The Stoics would commend that decision, not because it was easy, but because it was virtuous. Because choosing peace, even when it costs you connection, is choosing your higher self. They taught that a wise person cultivates relationships that reflect calm, not chaos. That proximity to someone should never come at the expense of your clarity, your presence, your inner freedom. So if you find yourself constantly caught in someone else's emotional storm, remember, you are not a lifeboat. You are not a sponge for their moods. You are not responsible for soothing the chaos they refuse to manage within themselves. You deserve stillness. And stillness is not boring, it's powerful. It allows your thoughts to settle, your heart to open, your life to expand. And in that space you can finally breathe. Not in fear of what's next, but in peace with what is. Sign 4. They diminish your self-worth. You start to notice it in the smallest moments. A joke that cuts too deep. A compliment that feels more like a correction. A glance that lingers just long enough to make you question yourself. Slowly, subtly, a relationship once filled with warmth begins to feel like a quiet erosion. And the target isn't your actions. It's your essence, it's who you are. In relationships where your self-worth is slowly diminished, the damage rarely announces itself. There's no grand betrayal, just a steady drip of words, tones, silences that wear down the way you see yourself. Until one day, you look in the mirror and can't tell if you see your reflection or their opinion of you. The Stoics taught that we must know our worth, not from arrogance, but from alignment with our nature. That our value comes not from validation, but from virtue. And yet, many of us hand over that judgment to others. We start to believe the version of ourselves they feed back to us, even when that version is small, flawed, and fragile. That's the danger. Because when someone repeatedly makes you feel inadequate, unworthy, or insufficient, they're not loving you. They're lowering you. Not lifting, not challenging, lowering. It's the friend who mocks your sensitivity, the partner who criticizes your body, the family member who reminds you of every mistake you've ever made, especially when you're trying to do better. It's emotional erosion disguised as honesty. And here's what makes it so hard to name. Sometimes they really believe they're helping. But intentions do not erase impact. The Stoics would say, judge not what they say, but what their presence produces in you. Ask yourself, do I feel stronger or smaller when I'm with them? Do I question myself more often around them? Have I stopped expressing certain parts of myself to avoid being put down? Do I feel like I'm constantly being corrected, even when I haven't asked? These aren't surface-level issues. This is about the very foundation of how you see yourself. Because once someone makes you doubt your worth often enough, you begin to adjust your behavior just to avoid that feeling. You play small so they won't feel threatened. You stay quiet so you won't be dismissed. You abandon parts of your identity so you can be easier to love. That is not love. That is self-erasure. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." But how can you have power over your mind when someone is constantly poisoning its soil? You can't grow where your worth is questioned. You can't flourish in an atmosphere of quiet criticism. You can't thrive in a space where you're loved only for who you could be, if only you were a little less you. And the hardest part, it doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who claim to know you best. People whose voices have shaped your self-perception since childhood. People whose approval once felt like air. But even love that's long-standing can become toxic. Even loyalty can become a leash. Let me share a story. Jordan had always been the quiet one. His older brother was louder, more charismatic, more traditionally successful. At family gatherings, Jordan was the punchline. Still single? Another job switch? You're too sensitive, man. It was all fun, until Jordan stopped laughing. He began believing that his softness was weakness, that his journey was failure, that his pace was laziness. It wasn't until years later in therapy that he realized he'd been shrinking to fit a narrative that was never his to begin with. He hadn't failed. He had been failed by the people who couldn't see his worth unless it looked like theirs. That's when he started walking away. Not from love, from smallness, from systems of comparison, from relationships that couldn't hold his truth. That's what we all must do eventually. Because the longer you stay where you're diminished, the more you start participating in your own shrinking. You begin to apologize for your dreams. You second-guess your talents. You laugh at jokes that hurt you just to keep things light. And each time a piece of your self-worth is quietly negotiated away. The Stoics wouldn't tell you to yell or fight back. They would tell you to return to reason, to observe what the relationship is doing to your character. Not your ego, your character. Because that's what truly matters. And if someone's presence is making you more bitter, more insecure, more unsure, that's not a reflection of you. It's a sign that the relationship itself is misaligned with your nature. You don't have to stay in environments that ask you to doubt your value. You don't have to justify your boundaries. You don't need to argue for your worth. You simply need to know it, to remember it, and to choose peace over proximity. Here's the truth. You can love someone deeply and still recognize that their presence diminishes you. That recognition doesn't make you disloyal. It makes you awake. Because love that lowers your light isn't love, it's shadow. And you were never meant to live in the dark. So reclaim your voice. Rebuild your sense of self, not through revenge, but through remembrance. You were always enough. You've always been worthy. And anyone who can't see that doesn't need to be close enough to define it. Sign 5, repeated violation of boundaries. A boundary is not a wall, it's a definition. A line drawn not to push others away, but to protect what's sacred within. It says, this is where I end and you begin. But in some relationships, that line is constantly crossed. Not because you weren't clear, not because they didn't hear you, but because they believe they're entitled to override your limits. And if it happens once, you might let it go. If it happens twice, you might explain again. But when it becomes a pattern, that's not misunderstanding, that's disrespect. And disrespect doesn't need to be loud to be dangerous. So it can sound like you're being too sensitive, or I was just joking, or I thought you'd be okay with it. The Stoics valued self-governance, the mastery of one's mind, emotions, and space. At the heart of integrity are boundaries. Without them, your identity becomes porous. Your energy leaks, your sense of agency erodes. Over time, you don't just lose your temper, you lose yourself. Some charm you, some excuse their violations with good intentions. But no matter the delivery, the message is the same. Your no doesn't matter. And when your no is negotiable, they are not loving you. They are managing you. Ask yourself, have I made my boundaries clear only to see them repeatedly ignored? Do I feel like I have to defend my boundaries to be taken seriously? Have I started adjusting them just to avoid conflict? Do I feel anxious or guilty after enforcing them? Boundaries are not burdens. They are necessary markers of self-respect. When someone violates your boundary, they're not just crossing a line. They're showing you their priorities, and you're not one of them. That stings, especially when it's someone close, a sibling, a partner, a parent. But love without respect is performance. The Stoics would ask, is this relationship contributing to my inner order or disrupting it? It's about power, not communication gaps. They believe their desires come before your dignity. You express a limit, they push it, you feel violated, they apologize or dismiss. You hesitate, they repeat. Your silence becomes permission. But silence is not consent. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's fatigue. Sometimes it's the realization that they won't change, and the only thing left to do is leave. Let me tell you a story. Sarah had a simple boundary. Don't read her messages. He agreed, but a week later she found him on her phone. He apologized, said it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. The cycle repeated, and she began to question herself. It wasn't about trust, it was about control. About a boundary she had every right to, and his belief he could cross it. She stayed longer than she should have, until she realized her relationship had become a negotiation of her most basic needs. That's when she left, not because she didn't love him, but because she finally started loving herself more. And that's the line we all must eventually draw, between love and self-abandonment, between compromise and corrosion. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action." That discomfort you feel, it's not an obstacle. It's an invitation to act, to protect what's yours, to stop asking for permission to be whole. And yes, boundary enforcement comes with loss. You may lose the comfort of that connection. You may lose the illusion of harmony. You may lose the version of you that was easy to manipulate, but in return, you gain self-respect, you gain peace. You gain a life where your limits are not seen as threats but as truths. The Stoics believed that living in accordance with nature meant honoring the self, not in selfishness but sovereignty. You are not designed to say yes to everything. You are allowed to walk away from people who treat your boundaries like challenges. Manipulation wrapped in love is still a form of violence. So stop apologizing for your lines. Start watching who respects them. The right people won't just tolerate your boundaries. They'll honor them, because they'll see your no as a reflection of your self-respect. And anyone who sees your self-respect as a threat was never safe to begin with. Sign 6. Lack of mutual respect and reciprocity. There's something deeply exhausting about relationships that feel one-sided. You give, you show up, you listen, you compromise, and in return, silence, resistance, indifference. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet realization that the energy isn't mutual. That respect is not equally exchanged. That effort flows in one direction, and it's yours. At first you make excuses. They're just busy. They show love differently. This is just a phase. But deep down, a quiet ache begins to grow. It's the ache of being unseen, unheard, taken for granted. And even the most disciplined soul begins to wear down in the face of persistent imbalance. The Stoics taught that we act with virtue, not for applause, but because it is right. But relationships are partnerships, not performances. When you're the only one showing up, you're in a transaction that drains you. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you, not endure. Associate." If you constantly feel like you're the one doing the work to keep the relationship alive, check in with yourself. Because love without reciprocity isn't love, it's labor. Ask yourself, am I always initiating conversations, plans, apologies? When I speak, do they listen or just wait for their turn to talk? Do they celebrate my wins or stay silent? When I'm in pain, do they show up or do I go through it alone? The answers may sting, but truth always stings before it frees. You deserve relationships where effort is mutual, where your energy isn't consumed but matched. There's a kind of heartbreak from being the only one who tries. It's not betrayal, it's the slow death of connection. The unanswered messages, the forgotten birthdays, the lack of curiosity about your inner world. Most painful, the realization that if you stop trying, the relationship might disappear entirely. That's not connection. That's dependency held up by your willpower. The Stoics would urge you confront this with courage, not with blame, but with honesty. Because where there's no mutual effort, there's no mutual respect. Let me share a story. Milan was the friend everyone could count on. He showed up, he celebrated others. But when he needed support, nothing. No check-ins, no visits, just silence. That's when he saw it. He had mistaken his availability for being valued. He wasn't loved for who he was useful. The illusion collapsed the moment he needed rather than gave. It hurt, but it freed him. Milan stopped overgiving, he stopped chasing, and real reciprocal relationships began to emerge. The Stoics didn't measure connection by time, but by virtue. And virtue in relationships looks like balance. Real relationships feel like mutual anchoring, not one person drowning while keeping the other afloat. If you're always the anchor, eventually you sink too. Mutual respect shows up in small, consistent ways. They remember what matters. They ask how you're doing. They honor your boundaries with grace. They show up not just when it's easy, but when it counts. When the scales always tip toward you, it becomes a burden. The Stoics remind us, you can't control how others show up. You can only control if you remain in their absence. And if their absence is more consistent than their effort, that's your decision point, not from anger, but from clarity. Because love without reciprocity is unbalanced. It erodes your spirit, it's unsustainable. You deserve to be met, not just admired. To be heard, not just tolerated. To be lifted, not left carrying the weight alone. So stop asking if you're too much. Ask if you're the only one trying. Mutuality isn't negotiable, it's the minimum. Not because you're entitled, but because your soul deserves rest in presence that gives as much as it takes. Let those who show up stay, and let the rest and fade with grace. Sign 7. Emotional manipulation and gaslighting. There are forms of harm that leave no bruises, no scars, no visible marks, but they leave you questioning the one thing you used to trust the most, your mind. Emotional manipulation and gaslighting are not just unhealthy dynamics, they are invasions of your internal reality. They creep in slowly. You begin to doubt your memory, your instincts, your emotions. They tell you that you're too sensitive, that you always make things bigger than they are, that you're imagining things. And little by little, you stop trusting yourself. That's the strategy, that's the manipulation. And it's not always calculated. Sometimes it comes from someone who is themselves broken, unhealed, fearful. But intention doesn't erase impact. And the impact of emotional manipulation is devastating. The Stoics taught the importance of reason, of knowing what is true internally. They taught that peace comes from aligning with what is real. But in a relationship where you're constantly gaslit, truth becomes elusive. Reality becomes negotiable. And your inner peace shatters under the weight of self-doubt. Gaslighting is not about disagreement, it's about distortion. You bring up something that hurt you, and somehow by the end of the conversation, you're the one apologizing. You express how something made you feel, and they respond by questioning your ability to perceive. You recall a moment clearly, and they tell you it didn't happen that way or at all. This isn't miscommunication, it's destabilization. And when you live in that dynamic long enough, you begin to lose track of what's real. You start to outsource your emotional reality to someone else, and that's when they have you. Because the moment you stop trusting yourself, you start needing them to define you. That is not love, that is psychological control. Ask yourself, do I often feel confused after conversations with them? Do I second-guess things I used to be sure of? Do I find myself apologizing for things I didn't do, just to restore peace? Have I become dependent on their version of events because I no longer trust my own? These questions cut deep. Because emotional manipulation isn't loud, it's a slow erosion of self-trust. And that's why it's so hard to escape. Because to leave, you don't just have to walk away from the person. You have to walk back to yourself, and that journey begins with recognizing the signs. Gaslighting phrases are predictable once you know them. You're overreacting. I never said that. You're just trying to start a fight. Stop being so dramatic. That never happened. Each one chips away at your grip on reality. Each one trains you to suppress, doubt, and eventually erase your inner world. And here's what's terrifying. The longer it goes on, the more it feels normal. You stop expecting clarity. You stop asking for validation. You start living in a fog, where every emotional bruise is self-inflicted, every conflict is your fault, and every truth is too fragile to hold on to. The Stoics would urge you to re-anchor, to reconnect with reason. Because reason isn't just cold logic. It's the internal compass that says, I felt that, I experienced that, I know what I saw. And if someone tries to twist that truth out of your hands, It is not a debate. It is a violation. Let me share a story. Nico was in a relationship that on the surface looked perfect. Loving messages, romantic gestures, public displays of affection, but behind closed doors things were different. Every time Nico brought up a concern, his partner would flip the script. You're imagining things. You always do this. You're ruining what we have. And Nico, rational, intelligent, grounded, began to spiral. He stopped sharing how he felt. He began to journal his memories just to have proof for himself. He cried more in silence than he ever had aloud. Until one day a friend asked him a simple question. Do you feel like yourself anymore? And the answer was no. That was the moment he chose to leave. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, steady, stoic. Because when you reclaim your reality, you don't need permission. You only need clarity. The Stoics remind us, what is in our control is our mind, our perception, our reason. When that's taken from you, you are no longer free. You are being held hostage, not by chains, but by confusion. And the most powerful thing you can do in that moment is to believe yourself again. To listen to the voice that says, this doesn't feel right. To trust the discomfort instead of explaining it away. To honor your memory, your experience, your intuition. Because no healthy relationship requires the destruction of your self-trust. And anyone who builds connection through emotional manipulation isn't a partner. They're an illusionist. Their love is conditional. Their reality is fluid. And your well-being is collateral damage. You are not difficult for having feelings. You are not unstable for remembering what happened. You are not dramatic for needing honesty. You are aware, you are conscious, you are coming home to yourself. And if someone can't meet you in that space, with openness, with integrity, with truth, then let them go. Not with vengeance, but with virtue. Because no matter how charming they are, how connected you feel, how much history you've shared, if they consistently distort your reality, question your sanity, and use your emotions against you, they are not your safe space, they are your signal to step away. And return to clarity, to self-trust, to peace. Sign 8, consistent neglect of your needs. Love without attention isn't love, it's a shadow, a hollow gesture, a presence in name only. Because what you need, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, is not extra. It's not negotiable, it's the foundation. And when those needs are ignored long enough, something inside begins to shut down. Consistent neglect isn't about forgetting to reply to a text or being occasionally distracted. It's about pattern, repetition, the daily absence of care, the chronic silence when you need support, the indifference when you speak your truth. And it's deeply invalidating, because when your needs are ignored, you don't just feel unimportant, you start to believe you are. The Stoics taught us to accept what we cannot control, but never to abandon what is essential to our well-being. Needs are not whims, they are signals. They are the voice of your inner world asking to be seen, heard, understood. And when someone consistently turns away from that voice, it's not forgetfulness, it's a choice. A choice to prioritize convenience over connection. A choice to love you in theory but not in practice. And eventually, that choice breaks something that apologies can't fix. Ask yourself, when I express what I need, is it received with care or defensiveness? Do I feel like I have to shrink my needs to make the relationship work? Do I often tell myself it's not a big deal when it actually is? Do I feel more fulfilled alone than I do in their presence? These aren't dramatic questions, they're necessary ones. Because unmet needs don't disappear, they become resentment. And resentment, left unspoken, becomes distance. Silence, disconnection that's felt even when you're in the same room. A Stoic doesn't chase affection, but neither does a Stoic pretend not to need it. Emotional suppression is not strength. Pretending you're fine is not virtue. Honoring your needs calmly, clearly, without shame, is a sign of deep self-respect. And if someone repeatedly meets your clarity with dismissal, it's not a misalignment of love languages. It's a mismatch of priorities. Let me share a story. Tasha had been in a relationship for 4 years. Kindness came in waves, holidays, birthdays, public events. But in the day-to-day, she felt invisible. Her partner rarely asked about her job, her health, her emotions. When she brought it up, he'd say, "You're too emotional," or "You always want something." Over time, she stopped asking. She stopped hoping. She told herself she was being too needy. Until one evening, after a long day, she came home crying from sheer exhaustion. He looked up from his phone and said, "Why are you crying now?" That was it. Not because it was the worst thing he'd ever said, but because it was the clearest sign that her needs had become background noise. She realized then she wasn't asking for too much. She was asking the wrong person. So she left, not in anger but in awakening. Because you don't have to be mistreated to walk away. You just have to be unseen for too long. The Stoics valued inner stability, but that stability is not sustainable in an environment that starves your emotional self. You cannot water others forever from an empty well. You cannot carry a relationship on self-denial. You cannot grow in a space where your needs are treated like burdens. Relationships are not meant to complete you, but they should support you. And support means showing up. Not perfectly, not constantly, but consistently. Support means paying attention to what you say, to what you don't say, to how you withdraw when your efforts go unnoticed. Support means knowing that love isn't proven in grand gestures. It's felt in the daily act of remembering, you matter. You matter. And if someone makes you question that repeatedly, it's not your fault, it's your wake-up call. You were not made to live in the shadows of someone's attention. You were not meant to beg for emotional presence. You were not born to accommodate chronic absence. Your needs are not punishments, they are reminders that you are human. And anyone who tries to make you feel guilty for being human isn't loving you, they're tolerating you. The Stoics would say be patient but not passive. If your boundaries are clear, if your words have been kind, if your needs have been expressed and still nothing changes, then the relationship is not broken. It's honest. It's showing you exactly what it is. Believe it. Stop fighting for crumbs when you deserve presence. Stop rewriting reality in the name of loyalty. Stop treating your own heart like a negotiation, because the love you crave begins with this truth. You don't need to be in pain to prove your value. And love that ignores your needs isn't love. It's abandonment in disguise. So speak your needs clearly. Speak them calmly, and if they are still dismissed, speak them elsewhere, with someone who listens, with someone who sees, with someone who remembers. Your well-being is not optional, it's essential. Sign 9. They make you feel guilty for choosing peace. Peace should never come with guilt. And yet in certain relationships, the moment you begin to protect your peace, by creating space, saying no, stepping away, you're met not with understanding but with blame. They say you've changed. They accuse you of being selfish, they question your loyalty. But what they're really saying is this: I'm uncomfortable with you no longer allowing me to disturb your calm. That's not love. That's control wearing the costume of connection. And this guilt they place on your shoulders, it's not yours, it belongs to those who benefited from your self-abandonment. The Stoics taught that tranquility, the inner stillness of mind, is one of the highest goods. They knew that peace isn't passive. It's a deliberate state, one that must be protected, one that often comes at a cost. And for many, the price is this: you will lose the favor of people who only felt powerful when your life was in disarray. There's a subtle manipulation in how some people react to your healing. When you stop participating in drama, they say you're distant. When you decline toxic conversations, they call you cold. When you prioritize solitude, they accuse you of being avoidant. But what they're really upset about is this: you're no longer playing the role they assigned to you. And that threatens them. Because peace is not just the absence of noise, it's the refusal to feed dysfunction. Ask yourself, have I ever been made to feel guilty for choosing rest over engagement? Do they frame my boundaries as rejection? When I take space to protect my energy, do they punish me with silence or accusations? Do I walk away from interactions with them feeling more exhausted than before? These are not signs of love. They're signs of emotional codependence masquerading as closeness. And the guilt you feel, that's conditioning. Conditioning that told you peace must always be earned. That rest is only allowed after you've taken care of everyone else. That saying no is selfish. The Stoics would challenge that deeply. They'd remind you you have a duty to your own soul first. Epictetus taught that we cannot control the behavior of others, but we can control our response. And when that response is choosing peace, it is not a rejection of them. It's an affirmation of you. But they won't see it that way, because your silence exposes their noise, your calm reveals their chaos. Your healing disrupts the system where they thrived on your wounds. And so they respond not with respect, but with guilt tripping. They remind you of everything they've done for you. They twist your absence into betrayal. They cry abandonment, forgetting that peace was all you ever wanted. But here's the truth: anyone who punishes you for choosing peace was never committed to your wellness. They were committed to your compliance. Let me share a story. Devon spent years as the emotional caretaker in his friend group, When he finally began therapy and set new boundaries, spending less time saying no more often, the backlash was immediate. You think you're better than us now? You've changed. You're not as fun anymore. What they really meant was, we miss the version of you that didn't protect his peace. Devon felt guilty, deeply, until his therapist asked him, would you ever make someone feel bad for taking care of themselves? He paused. Then why do you tolerate it in return? That question set him free. Because he realized, guilt is often the reaction of those who benefited from your self-neglect. The Stoics would call this clarity. Not cruelty, not selfishness, clarity. Because the moment you wake up to your own worth, you stop apologizing for needing quiet, for saying no, for resting. Peace doesn't need justification, and it certainly doesn't require guilt. True love, healthy, grounded love, celebrates your peace. It says, I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. It respects your boundaries. It honors your right to say no without punishment. Because in real love, your peace is not a threat. It's a shared goal. If someone truly loves you, your inner stillness will not provoke resentment. It will inspire reflection. But if your peace angers them, it's because they depended on your chaos to keep the relationship alive. That's not sustainable. That's not stoic. That's survival built on sacrifice. And your life is worth more than that. You were not born to keep others comfortable at the cost of your clarity. You were not made to explain your need for rest to people who only feel alive when you're overwhelmed. You were not designed to carry the emotional weight of others just so they don't have to sit with their own. Peace is not selfish, it's sacred. And if someone demands you surrender it to prove your love, they don't understand love at all. So release the guilt, breathe. And let peace become your new standard. Let it become the filter. Let it reveal who belongs and who only stayed because your chaos made them feel needed. You don't owe anyone access to your nervous system. You don't owe constant availability in the name of loyalty. You don't owe your exhaustion to people who never learned to carry themselves. You owe yourself peace. The Stoics would say, let go of what disturbs your mind. And if guilt is the only thing keeping the relationship alive, it's not love you're holding on to. It's fear. Fear of being called selfish, fear of losing connection, fear of being alone. But solitude with peace is far more nourishing than connection rooted in guilt. So choose the quiet, choose the calm, choose yourself, and watch what happens to your world when peace becomes the non-negotiable. Sign 10. Your growth is seen as a threat. Some people will love you until you evolve, until you start speaking with more clarity, until you stop apologizing for taking up space, until you begin choosing boundaries over people-pleasing. That's when the shift happens. Suddenly you're arrogant. You've changed. You're not who you used to be. But the truth is, you were never fully you when they were comfortable. And now that you are, they're uncomfortable because your growth challenges their control. It disrupts the dynamic where you stayed small to keep the relationship safe. And here's the painful reality. If someone sees your healing as a threat, it's because they were invested in the version of you that tolerated harm. The Stoics taught that life is a constant practice of becoming, of living in alignment with reason, virtue, and self-awareness. And yet in relationships, growth often reveals hidden fractures, because not everyone is willing to grow with you. Some want the benefits of your better self, without accepting the boundaries that come with it. Ask yourself, since I've grown, have they become distant or resentful? Do they try to downplay or dismiss my progress? Do they guilt me for having new standards? Have they stopped celebrating me the moment I stopped needing them? Growth is not betrayal, but it feels like betrayal to those who only knew how to relate to you when you were broken, when you were always available, when you didn't question their behavior, when you prioritized them over your own evolution. Now that you don't, they feel threatened because your growth exposes their stagnation. Your clarity exposes their manipulation. Your independence reveals how much they relied on your dependence. The Stoics would say, truth has a price, and often that price is comfort. To grow is to risk losing those who only loved the previous version of you. Your duty is not to their comfort, it's to your character. And character cannot grow where it must apologize for existing. Let me tell you a story. Kai was always the fixer in his relationships. Empathetic, giving, loyal. He would bend, compromise, overextend, just to keep everyone else happy, until he burned out. He began to shift. Therapy, journaling, saying no for the first time, prioritizing peace over chaos. He started standing taller, speaking slower, feeling clearer, and not everyone liked it. His partner said, You think you're better now? His brother said, you're acting different. Even his closest friends began to pull away. Kai was crushed until he realized they didn't miss him. They missed who he used to be for them. They missed the version of him that dimmed his light so they could shine. And now that he didn't, they were gone. But Kai, he remained. He grieved, yes, but he also grew. And that's the paradox. Your growth might cost you relationships, but it will always return you to yourself. The Stoics believed that the highest form of strength was to stand alone in your truth. Because growth isn't about becoming better than others. It's about becoming more you. And anyone who truly loves you will not resist your expansion. They will rise with it. But those who were only attached to your weakness will fall away the moment you evolve beyond their comfort zone. Let them. Let the distance speak. Let your silence become sacred. Because if being more honest, more whole, more free causes rupture, it's not your fault. It's your freedom in motion. You don't need to shrink back to who you were just to keep someone who fears who you're becoming. You don't need to dim your insight, soften your voice, or dull your progress for anyone. The Stoics remind us the only life worth living is one rooted in virtue. And virtue cannot thrive in a cage built by others' expectations. So step out. Not with spite, but with sovereignty. Stop asking, will they still love me if I grow? Start asking, why did they only love me when I didn't? Because love that requires your smallness is not love, it's control. And you are not here to be controlled. You are here to become. And if becoming means walking alone for a while, so be it. Because solitude in growth is better than company in suppression. Always. Some departures don't come with slammed doors or final arguments. Sometimes they happen in silence. In the quiet recognition that staying costs more than leaving ever could. Not every relationship can be saved. Not every bond deserves your endurance. Not every connection is meant to last a lifetime. But every time you choose your peace, your clarity over confusion, your growth over guilt, you come home to yourself. That is the essence of Stoicism. Not detachment, not coldness, but alignment. With the life you were meant to live, unapologetically and without shrinking. The world may call you heartless for walking away. Let them. The weight you carried, the nights you didn't sleep. You know the ways you compromised your soul. Let go of the myth that staying is strength. Sometimes strength is walking. Sometimes courage is the moment you stop explaining yourself. The most radical act of love is the love you give to yourself. The Stoics remind us, external things are not under our control, but our character. This belongs to us. So choose peace, choose presence. Choose the life that allows you to rise. And when someone asks why you left, you won't need a dramatic story. You'll just say, because I stopped needing to suffer to feel connected. And that will be enough, because it is enough. You are enough. And if this message spoke to you, share it, like, subscribe, and let it reach others.